Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here for thedailysheeple.com, and this is your news shot. So to Liberty Blitzkrieg we go. Mike Krieger doing a little self-reflection at the twilight of the U.S. empire. We are indeed in the twilight. It wouldn't take that much, believe it or not, and I think we're already starting to see the signs that, for example, with the economy, sovereign nations, even individual bondholders are not buying U.S. sovereign debt at the pace that they once bought it. As a matter of fact, China has put the stops to buying U.S. sovereign debt. They're in a sell phase. You get enough people to do that, you got to raise interest rates. The more you raise interest rates, the more it costs to service the debt. The debt is over $20 trillion. It's going to cost an exorbitant amount of money just to pay interest on the debt. Yet here we go. Spend, spend, spend. You've got the banks in a precarious situation, especially if the bond market goes belly up. That will then go and bleed over into the stock market. You'll have a stock market correction. The banks will be under stress, and all this kind of stuff. They'll be looking for bailouts. They won't get the bailout. They'll get the bail-in. Meanwhile, you have the federal government infringing more on states' rights, more and more, causing more friction. There is a lot going on here in the United States that could cause a serious setback and or lead to the demise of the current structure that we know today. And so Mike Krieger starts out with a passage from Cicero. And he starts out, he says, "There's a true law, a right reason, conformable to nature, universal, unchangeable, eternal, whose command urges us to duty, and whose prohibitions restrain us from evil. Whether it enjoins or forbids, the good respect it injunctions, and the wicked treat them with indifference. This law cannot be contradicted by any other law, and is not liable either to derogation or abrogation. Neither the Senate nor the people can give us any dispensation for not obeying this universal law of justice. It needs no other exposer or interpreter than our own conscience. It's not one thing at Rome or another at Athens, one thing today and another tomorrow, but in all times and nations, this universal law must forever reign, eternal and imperishable. It is the sovereign master and emperor of all beings. God himself is its author, its promulgator, its enforcer. He who obeys it not flies from himself and does violence to the very nature of man. For his crime he must endure the severest penalties hereafter, even if he avoid the usual misfortunes of the present life." Now, American influence abroad, Mike writes, as defined by the power and status of the U.S. empire, has been in consistent decline for nearly 2 decades. Indeed, when the history books are written, it'll be clear that the dot-com boom and the bust at the end of the 20th century marked the peak of U.S. imperial strength. Shortly after that bubble burst, our nation was faced with the brutal and traumatizing 9/11 attacks, and the overreaction to this event unleashed a mass insanity across the American public from which we never recovered. Specifically, the attacks of September 11, 2001 were ruthlessly and immediately exploited by degenerate, power-hungry charlatans in D.C. and elsewhere to fearmonger an entire country to give up liberty in exchange for a promise of safety. And with that devilish bargain, our society committed cultural suicide. As is often the case with such terrible events, the worst of the worst took charge with our government and began to define the cultural narrative in fascistic terms. These sociopathic warmongers saw the terror attacks as an excuse to advance their twisted imperial ambitions abroad, while also earning a fortune pursuing unconstitutional surveillance opportunities at home. This Orwellian death spiral has been going on now for over 16 years and doesn't skip a beat, irrespective of those who sit in the Oval Office. It's an uncountable, corrupt, and nefarious beast consisting of government, intelligence agencies, mega corporations, and Wall Street. And this, my friends, is late-stage U.S. empire, and it's going to consume everything it can in its path before coming to its inevitable end. The American people have been fed endless lies for a very long time. And while people are starting to wake up, too many continue to fall for the same old deranged partisan nonsense. Obama was supposed to save us from Bush, and then Trump was supposed to save us from Obama. And half the country now prays for some yet to be determined presidential savior like Oprah to come rescue them in 2020. That, my friends, is the definition of insanity. And the only way we recover as a nation is if we take a long, hard look in the mirror and see how stupid and arrogant and destructive we've been since 9/11, and even before that, folks. I mean, think about this. We have, over the course of the 20th century and into the 21st century, stuck our nose in so many places where they just did not belong. And why? For things, for selfishness. It's the only way I can put it. For self-centeredness, for the desires-based economy. That is really at the crux of why we've invaded and stolen resources and put puppet governments in place all over the world, is so that at the end of the day, the control freaks can have their way and control the globe, and meanwhile, you can get your cheap trinkets that, if anybody that's my age or older can remember, even back before the free trade agreements and all that kind of stuff, you only had one or maybe two TVs in the entire house because you couldn't afford a TV in every room. You know, and that was a 19-inch tube television. And that 19-inch tube television may have run you $400 or $500 back in 1980. You know, you take a look at how much a desktop, like one of the Apple IIe's, when that came out, how much that cost relative to salaries. Things cost a lot more then because things were made in America. You didn't have as many imports. And then when you did, they came from not so much emerging economies, but from established economies like Japan and even Taiwan. And, you know, made in Taiwan used to be a joke. It's not a joke anymore. Now you have people that are addicted to cheap plastic gadgetry, electronics, basically anything at your fingertip. Now you don't even have to go anywhere. You just order it online. I'm a big fan of Amazon. I love it. You know? But if we were to utilize the same framework that was in place back in, say, 1980, no one could afford one of these things. If we had to manufacture these here in the United States and utilize the resources that we had instead of outsourcing to China, utilizing their rare earth elements, which, by the way, China owns 90% of the rare earth element mines in the world, and we had to manufacture these here, first of all, you'd have to recycle all your electronics. And then the $1,500 smartphone just became a $3,000 smartphone, maybe a $4,500 smartphone. Because it would cost so much more to mine the rare earth elements because of the environmental restrictions that are here in place in the United States that are not in place in China. Go to a rare earth element mine in China and see the waste that's left behind and the absolute devastation. There's no regard for the environment over there when it comes to that. So it's much cheaper to mine it and refine it. It's also cheaper because of labor. Labor's much cheaper over there. Whereas here, we not only have minimum wage, but you also have labor unions. You don't have labor unions over in China. All of that plays into things would cost a lot more if we were self-sufficient. People would have to get by with a lot less, like we had to before. I don't know if we're capable of going back to that place. I think people have become so self-absorbed that that would throw them into shock. I wonder how many heart attacks would take place, if people couldn't get the latest Apple phone or whatever because it's just out of reach. I mean, this is where we're at now as a society. So I don't know if recovering is in the cards for the United States. It's obvious, Mike goes on, these dishonest politicians in government are constantly lying to you, but many people just simply refuse to admit it. The public loves to be endlessly conned along silly, tribal, partisan lines rather than admit that the rot isn't partisan, but systemic. All sociopaths in D.C. have to do is tweak the message a little every 4 years to get people frothing at the mouth for a new savior. And the reason we can't have nice things is because too many of us are so completely gullible and easily manipulated by power-hungry crooks who we paradoxically call leaders. And the only thing these people are leading us to is into a gigantic ditch. I mean, it's unbelievable. He says, earlier today, I came across the following tweet, and it summed things up perfectly for me, from Rudolph Havenstein, the anti-Davos man. He says, okay, no joke. 45.6 million Americans on food stamps in the 9th year of this recovery, with stocks at record high. Says something is very wrong with the official narrative. And by the way, he says this is not an anti-food stamp tweet. So it's all a lie. All these leaders, whether they're politicians in government or CEOs at mega corporations, they're all lying to you, he says. Things are not well and won't get better until we grow up, until we take responsibility and stop being conned. And if you don't know who the sucker at the imperial poker table is, why, it's probably you. This is why we fight. Mike Krieger, the Sheeple, SHTF plan, activist posts, a Free Thought Project. I could go on and on. This is why we do what we do. Because we're sick of being conned. Because we're sick of being lied to. And because we're sick of the status quo. And the only way that this is going to change is if we change the mindset. And the first thing that you have to do at the end of the day is to put humanity first before yourself. You have to. You have to rid yourself of the self-centeredness and not buy in to the fear-mongering and the baloney that the government spews. You have to stand up for your rights, for freedom, if you truly want it back here in America. Because right now it doesn't exist. Right now it's Amish getting told that they must hook up to electricity, or compulsory education, or compulsory vaccination, or compulsory health care. Compulsory in the land of the free. Doesn't quite sound like freedom to me. We truly are, my friends, at the end of the road here as far as the United States and its dominance in the world. And I can't necessarily say that's a bad thing, because when you look at how the world has degenerated, when we should have been making great progress, here we are, humanity. Why, we're not the barbaric race that we once were. Oh, really? I beg to differ. With 3 billion plus people starving in the world today, with all of our grand technology and all the resources in the world, we simply can't seem to figure that out. And until we get through that, and until we start to put people first before ourselves, nothing is ever going to change. Love, mutual respect, personal responsibility. If we can just embrace those things, my friends, all the problems of the world would melt away tomorrow. I'm Joe Joseph. This was thedailysheeple.com's News Shot. Feel free to comment below and visit our website at thedailysheeple.com. Hashtag Wake the Flock Up. Email address tdsjoe at Comcast.net. Have a great day, everybody.